on. That's after David Dimbleby.
Tonight we're at the port of Dover and welcome to Question Time. With me here, the Secretary of State for Transport, who argued the case for Brexit, and when that led to the fall of Cameron, ran Theresa May's campaign for leadership of the Tory party, Chris Grayling. A lawyer who became Director of Public Prosecutions before being elected an MP, the Shadow Secretary for Brexit, Keir Starmer, the Irish MEP who is now Vice President of the European Parliament, Mairead McGuinness, a broadcaster with the Russian-funded TV channel RT and presenter of a weekly current affairs programme on that channel, Afshin Rattansi, and the Shakespearean actor and Hollywood star born in Dundee, a staunch supporter of Scottish independence, Brian Cox. Thank you. Thank you very much. Remember at home, of course, if you want to get into these arguments, use our hashtag BBCQT either on Twitter or on Facebook. Let's have our first question from Paul Wilson, please.
How certain are you that the Salisbury attack is beyond doubt the responsibility of the Russian state?
Keir Starmer.
Thank you for that question. This was an appalling attack using military-grade nerve agents in a town, Salisbury. It could have been any town. It could have been here. And it deserves to be condemned by all of us without reservation, Now, the Prime Minister asked serious questions of Russia earlier this week based on the investigation carried out by our security and intelligence services and the work at Porton Down. And no answers have been given. Have been given. And that led her to the conclusion that there is no alternative explanation other than that responsibility lies with Russia. And as you will have seen, Germany, France and the US have joined her in that conclusion. And that is the right conclusion. And for that reason, I think it's very important that we support the action that the Prime Minister laid out on Wednesday as a response to this unprovoked attack. An attack on our sovereignty and our rule of law, and not for the first time. As a lawyer, I represented Marina Litvinenko. It was my privilege to bring a case on her behalf against Russia for that atrocious murder 10, 11 years ago now. This is not the first time. It needs to be called out with no ifs and no buts, and we need strong action as set out by the Prime Minister on Wednesday.
Well, now, you will know there's been some criticism, not least from the Labour Party, of Jeremy Corbyn's response to this. And I want to quote to you what he writes in tomorrow's Guardian newspaper: to rush way ahead of the evidence being gathered by the police in a fevered parliamentary atmosphere serves neither justice nor our national security. Well, do you agree with what he says or disagree?
I think everything that everybody pretty much has said, Jeremy included, is you've got to allow space for the police, for the security and intelligence services to do their job. We all recognise that. We absolutely recognise that. And Jeremy is right to say let them get on with their job. I've worked, when I was Director of Public Prosecutions, closely with the police, closely with the security and intelligence service, and I know the quality of their work and I hold it in the highest regard.
The accusation is that the government was rushing ahead of the evidence. Do you think the government has rushed ahead of the evidence?
No. Of course, the evidence has to come out and be carefully assessed, and we'll all do that. The government will do it. Theresa May, I hope, will make further statements setting out the evidence. What has happened this week is an initial response to this attack and a response based on Russia being asked serious questions and not answering those questions. This was military-grade material available only in Russia. There were only two options. Either it was directly from them or they lost control of it. Theresa May put serious questions on the table and they were not answered. And in those circumstances, I really don't think that we should be other than very clear about the seriousness of this.
I'll come back to
and as I say, we've got to see it in
this
context.
Was it right to expel the 23 diplomats, in your view?
Absolutely.
OK, fine. We'll come back to it in a moment. Afshin Rattansi.
Obviously, everyone condemns this attack. I mean, it's terrible for the police officer and these two spies. And can I just say, just before that, thank you to the BBC and to Menton for inviting me, because the head of the liaison committee in Parliament, Sarah Wollaston MP, who the liaison committee is the one that quizzes the Prime Minister, has told all these people on the panel to walk off the minute I sit here. That's free speech in this country coming
She's
from
not had any
the
discussion with
chair.
me whatsoever.
She
It's on
contacted
Twitter.
me.
What you're talking
I
about?
have had no conversation with her. She has not spoken to me.
She has tweeted that the
I
entire
don't care
panel
what
should
she's
leave.
tweeted. I know she's not spoken to me.
I didn't say she's supposed to. I haven't said. Hang on.
Listen,
I never said that she's spoken.
We're not really dealing with one person's tweets. Let's
She's
deal with
tweeted that question.
Let's
I
deal with
had
the
no
question.
idea.
Now, hang on. The
Okay.
question is, how certain are you the Salisbury attack is beyond doubt the responsibility of the Russian state?
Well, this person here to my right, who has close contacts with the intelligence services, says only Russia had these chemicals, which is quite something, given that Britain vetoed in the past few hours a UN Security Council resolution asking for an investigation into these atrocities in Wiltshire. Why did Britain veto that resolution? That's interesting, isn't it? Why is it that neocon, neoliberal Labour Party members continue to try and use WMD to push us into war? That is an implication, certainly, of what your leader, Jeremy Corbyn, has been saying. I know you didn't support Jeremy Corbyn for the leadership. As for your work at the CPS, as for your work at the CPS, let it not be any doubt that recent emails have shown while you ran that department.
Sorry, look, we're getting off the point. The point, you were asked a very simple question by Paul Wilson. Do him the honour of answering his question as a member of the audience. How certain are you... How certain are you that the Salisbury attack is beyond doubt the responsibility of the Russian state?
Even the Prime Minister said it was only highly likely, so it's certainly not beyond reasonable doubt. We must have an urgent investigation.
She said there's no alternative conclusion, actually, which is rather different from saying highly likely.
She then followed that up. The White House has now said no plausible, changing what the Prime Minister said. I really, really don't know. I don't have that certainty. And in a sense, RT is a channel going underground. We try and look at certainty and question more. We cannot believe our governments anymore the way we used to, just because a Prime Minister stands up and says, the security services have told us something.
OK.
Those days are over.
Chris Grayling.
We wouldn't have taken the steps we have if we were not completely satisfied that the Russian state was either behind the appalling attack in Salisbury or refused to give an explanation as to how those nerve gases could have left their control. We gave them the chance to respond properly. They did not respond. Of course, we're dealing with a situation where we've seen an attack on somebody who's already been threatened by the Russian state. We've had previous issues. We are satisfied that the action we have taken is in response to a genuine act. It is the right response. And I'm really pleased and grateful to our allies around the world, in the United States, in France, in Germany, for the statement they've joined us in today, making it clear that they also support the British government and the steps we've taken. This is completely, absolutely, unreservedly unacceptable. This is a violent act that has affected members of the public in an English country city. It is absolutely unacceptable, and we must stand up to this. We cannot, as a Western world, as democratic nations, possibly countenance accepting such willfully reckless, hostile acts against our nation.
How did you become so certain, to use the Prime Minister's words of yesterday, that there's no alternative conclusion other than the Russian state being culpable for attempted murder? What happened between Monday, when she was more cautious, and Wednesday? Well, and are you, in your own mind, absolutely certain it was, so to speak, President Putin who organised or allowed this to happen? Is that your view?
I mean, I don't know exactly what the mechanics were at the other end, but what I do know is that we have, as Keir rightly says, something we are both absolutely agreed on. We have the finest, in my view, intelligence services in the world. We have experts who've looked into the nature of the chemicals used, who have reached conclusions, have provided information to government. We've acted on that information.
The finest intelligence services in the world. They should have protected this man then.
When don't be so trivial about a really serious incident.
Mairead McGuinness.
It's interesting that in the European Parliament today, Claire Moody, the MEP who lives in Salisbury, spoke very passionately about this incident. So there's huge support from the colleagues in the European Parliament because this is an atrocious incident. I mean, it is actually quite unbelievable what happened. And there are 2 people very seriously ill. But I know nothing about these chemicals until this incident. And I've read quite a bit now. It's very frightening. We ought to be quite terrified that they exist, and they do exist. And beyond the detail of how can I be certain, look, I'm no expert in these issues, but I have to believe what you're saying in terms of the security services. What troubles me about this incident is that it will not blow over very easily or very quickly. And you know that the European Union, because of Crimea, put sanctions on Russia. In a sense, we had to do that, but it has emboldened perhaps the Russian spirit. Europe took a hit at the time with products not being allowed into Russia. I'm not sure what will happen next because of this incident. I listened live to the Russian ambassador to the UN, and he didn't pull his punches last night when he spoke and used some very harsh words about the British intelligence service and rejected totally. But if not Russia, who else? And really, I think the big question for us is, how are we going to stop these type of chemicals in existence, first of all, and how do we get rid of them? And that is the big challenge. But I would worry about the consequences in the medium and long term. This is going to drag on quite a bit. OK,
we'll come on to that in just a moment. You, sir, up there on the gangway.
Well, to echo your point, Mairead, if this spy who has connections with Russia is killed by chemical or attacked by chemicals that is known to be in the hands of Russia, and Russia refuses to answer questions about it, who else are we to blame? Who else could possibly possess these weapons, have a reason to go after this person?
I thought 16 countries.
Do you just want to answer that? I'll
16 countries, aren't they, supposed to have this? Obviously, Britain has this chemical weapon at Portondown. Anyway, I think this certainty is very dangerous. And of course, it's been said many times before that Putin, who has an election on Sunday, about to have a World Cup, trying to put Russia on the big stage and stop this pariah status it has in NATO nations, it's not very good timing for him, is it?
Brian Cox.
It's terrible timing for him. It's a truly, truly appalling act. There is no excuse for it whatsoever. But I'd like to address the gentleman's question. Could you say your question again, sir?
I asked, how can you be certain beyond doubt that it was the Russian state?
I think that's the key. I am not so sure. You see, one has to understand, and there's a lot of ignorance about how how it operates. And there are various agencies within Russia, intelligence agencies such as the GRU, the MSB, and they've had a kind of autonomy since the Soviet times. They've not been touched at all. Now, one of these agencies will probably have access to this very nerve agent that we're talking about. And it seems to me that as good a scenario is actually of a rogue element. And that's even more dangerous, much more dangerous than what's going on. A rogue element who decides that they're going to, and they have long memories. These guys, this gentleman that's been attacked and his daughter, tragically, he is not liked by certain people.
But, Brian, I don't want to interrupt you, but if it's a rogue element, was it right of the Prime Minister and the government to expel 23 Russian diplomats? And was it right of America and all the others to sign the letter that they did?
I'm not sure about that. I question it, but I accept it as an authority. I would say, OK, fine, that clearly there's been a scrupulousness in the decision for that, so I wouldn't question it. But at the same time, I do think there's a fundamental element that's missing in relationship to, as this gentleman said, was the state responsible? Now, as I said, the state, Putin wouldn't, he puts himself in a terrible state by having this incident happening now. Why would he want it to happen now as he's heading up for an election, as he's embracing the World Cup? It doesn't make any sense.
All right.
Absolutely makes no sense.
You up there in the white shirt, sir? Yes, on the.
I find it quite ridiculous the bloke from Russia Today is still towing this line. Given Russia's checkered history with chemical weapons, they're backing the Assad regime in Syria. However, I'd probably toe the line of Vladimir Putin, given what he does to his enemies.
Okay.
Actually, I should just say about chemical weapons. I mean, I'm not actually saying Russia didn't do it either. I'm just saying question what you're being told by the Prime Minister and what the intelligence she's receiving.
Absolutely.
I'm not saying either. The Russians could have done it. It could have been the Kremlin.
All right, the person in blue there.
If Parliament really thinks that this was Russia, should all UK political parties give back any donations given from Russia?
All right, well, Chris Grayling, you know that was a point raised by Jeremy Corbyn on Monday. Do you think the Tory party should give back donations from Russia?
There are strict laws on political donations in this country. They have to be given by British citizens or British businesses.
The Defence Secretary took money from...
I do think there is a really serious question about money here, because it's really important that we go after some of the money that's here in this country that's being used for all sorts of purposes. It shouldn't be. There are measures in place. We in the Labour Party have been pushing the government to go even further. I hope they now will. I think there's an inclination to do so. But we've been forcing this issue because it's very important. There's a lot of money around which ought to be seized, which isn't being seized at the moment. We've got to crack down on this in every way. I support the action that's been taken. But I think perhaps we should go even further in some respects. And I think the government may go down that route, and I hope they do.
But what is the effect of cutting down or finding this money in terms of what happened in Salisbury? Does it have any effect on that? I'll come to you next. Yes. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. It doesn't have a direct effect. I accept that these are separate things in the sense that this was an appalling attack. But there is, and there has been for a long time, a lot of money that should have been tracked down and used in this country, and we haven't been good enough at doing that, particularly in relation to Russian oligarchs.
Systemic. That has been absolutely
I know,
systemic.
but that's why we need to...
And it's been allowed to go on for far too long.
What's the Defence Secretary? 30,000 of Russian money. Boris Johnson, 20,000. What are these ties of huge amounts of money to your party, Chris?
Is that the question you want to put?
Let's have a 24-hour deadline on Russian money in Britain.
The woman there, yes.
I'd like to actually just quote your previous client, the widow of Alexander Litvinenko, who is actually... Sorry, Maria.
Yeah.
Yes. She has actually said publicly that she feels that the Conservatives should be very careful about their donors, particularly looking at the Russians.
All right, Chris Grayling, you can answer this. We've got another question. No, you said it's legal. The point is, why do they want to give money to the Tory party? What do they get back from giving money to the Tory party?
The simple reality, you can't accept money from people who are not UK citizens. Or UK businesses.
This is the wife of the Russian deputy finance minister, the wife of the former Putin's deputy finance minister at a fundraising event, Lyubov Chernyakin, Gavin Williamson, the defence secretary of this country, who protects national security of this country, 30,000.
We have
That's
clear
Russian
rules
money.
about political donations. We follow those rules. They're properly scrutinised. What we must not do, we have a lot of people who are Russian, who are now UK citizens, who live in London, who have actually left Russia.
This is the wife
their distaste
of the former
regime
deputy
there.
finance minister.
We should not tar those people with the brush.
Where do you think
those
she
who
got the
perpetrate
30,000 to give the defence secretary?
Let's move on to another aspect of this that is worrying people. Martin Prince, can I have your question, Mr. Prince?
Does the panel feel we have now entered a new Cold War?
Have we entered a new Cold War? Mairead, you start on that.
Yeah, I was probably alluding to my fears about that when I said that it's not just this incident and the reaction to it, is the medium and long-term consequences. And this isn't just the start of a process. If I talk to my colleagues from the Baltic member states, they live in fear. And in fact, they look to Europe and NATO for support. And it's only when you talk in detail to them about how their lives were and how they're terrified again. So if you now have the UK, France, the US and what was the fourth? Germany very strongly coming out, the Russians will feel this. There will be a response. And what I would really be concerned about is how long are we going to have this? It is a battle, a diplomatic battle, a difficult one at the moment. How long will this last and how will it be fixed? And it has to be fixed with words. And to go back to money, money is a very corrupting thing, unfortunately. And sometimes people with money are looked at slightly different than those who don't have money in terms of political reaction. And I'm not saying that of the UK because I don't have the experience or knowledge, but I think this is a global issue, that money can find its place for security. But
what's
given
this
your
got to do with the Cold War question?
Well, I think it is part of this general sense of fear that is there about Russia and its potential to interfere, not just this horrible incident. For example, there was a report in the Sunday Times that the embassy in Dublin was part of, if you like, almost an espionage team. They had more people in the embassy and they've made it bigger. And so much so that the ambassador to Ireland today brought in the media to say that is not the case.
But I don't quite get what you're saying about... You talk about money all the time, and we know large billions and billions of pounds have come out of Russia to the West.
Yes, exactly.
Are you saying that is creating the conditions of the Cold War?
No, that isn't creating conditions, but I think it's something that the West has to acknowledge and decide whether it's positive or negative for our relationships with Russia.
All right.
Does it skew our relationship?
Keir Starmer.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead, Keir.
I think this is a really important question because what happens next really matters for all of us. I think many people had hoped that the end of the Cold War would mark an opportunity for a new relationship with Russia based on the rule of law, on the protection and respect of human rights. But that hasn't happened, and this has to be seen in its proper context. I've mentioned Marina Litvinenko and the work I did with her, but the list is a long one. Crimea, what's happened in Ukraine, the assault on lesbian and gay rights that's gone on, the Syrian attacks. There is a whole list. I mean, you could go on and on in terms of where the relationship has gone wrong. Now, that has been a missed opportunity to reset the relationship with Russia, which would have stabilised the world, allowed a more peaceful coexistence, and we need to tackle all of this in the round. I absolutely agree this has got to be done through words, and Jeremy Corbyn said the response has got to be proportionate, and he's right about that. This has to be dealt with carefully. We've got to be robust about what we stand for. But really, the litany of things in the last few years that Russia's been involved in only has to be gone through for people to see that this is a missed opportunity.
If we're about to if we're about to enter another Cold War with Russia, and we turn the money off to the oligarchs, remove the spies from the UK, how do we continue then to protect our police officers and members of the public who are also impacted by this chemical attack?
Chris Grayling?
Well, the truth is we've got to be good at our intelligence. We've got to do everything we possibly can to prevent anything like this happening again. And it is a mix of response. We've got to seek to change Russia through diplomatic means. At the same time, we've got to be robust in responding when things happen. And that may be our response right now to the terrible events in Salisbury. It is also about making sure that our friends in the Baltic states receive proper support. That is why we are providing military support right now, to give those nations comfort that we are with them, we are on their side. So we've got to be strong and resolute in the face of a threat, but we've got to seek to use diplomacy to ease that threat away.
Afshin?
Are we reaching a Cold War? I think certainly it's the worst in my lifetime. It's like a Cuban Missile Crisis, Theresa May seems to want. Obviously, Vladimir Putin can turn off the lights in this studio because of appalling energy strategic decisions over decades in this country. How we've allowed Russia to have such an important role in our energy sector, I don't know. 800 British troops, what are they doing on the Russian border? What we heard from Moscow was, do not threaten a nuclear power. The stakes have never been higher. If Vladimir Putin is indeed running a rogue state, he won't hesitate, presumably, to kill us all. Or can one actually talk to him? This litany that this man who used to run the CPS, you talking about it. Ukraine, Sir Keir. Ukraine, there was a coup in Ukraine. We have the tapes of the US ambassador. Listen to them on YouTube. These are real tapes. This was an organized coup d'etat in Ukraine. The Crimean people, what is Keir trying to say? We should take the people of Crimea want to be part of Russia. We're going to force them to be part of Ukraine. And you know what's worse about this? And I think the Russian people, quite apart from Putin, see this, is you are supporting banderas and right-wing anti-Semitic movements in the center of Ukraine who are part of this coup. Fascists, Nazis. When the trade union building burned in Ukraine, these are the people you're supporting. You don't need to support Russia to say this. But what is most serious for this country is national security. And I believe that the steps taken this week have endangered our national security. Russia is in a broad alliance with the BRICS countries. Russia is in an alliance with China and the big superpowers of this century. And post-Brexit, we're going to make friends. I'm sure we are going to get over this.
The woman in the second row
This is a very
from the back
dangerous
there.
stage.
Woman from the second row from the back, yes.
I don't think that we can tackle this issue in isolation. I think it does require our partners in Europe and with the UN particularly to begin to think about increasing sanctions. So we've got to do it in partnership.
And in fact, the President of the Council, Donald Tusk, wants it on the agenda for next week's Prime Minister's meeting in Brussels. So there is solidarity.
Brown Cox.
But I think from a security point of view, I don't think the UK is leaving Europe, I have to say.
Brown Cox, please. Hold on.
I think we are about to enter into a Cold War. I think it's unavoidable. And it's a war that's based on total greed. I think that we've allowed things to get out of hand, particularly in our relationship to how the city became a kind of laundromat for illegal money from Russia. And the Americans aren't much better, especially with that clown who's running the show over there. I think this is inevitable. This is what's happened. When you have two narcissists, one like Trump and Putin, we're in a very unhealthy state of affairs. When the so-called leader of the free world is the man that he is, and the so-called leader of the Eastern Bloc is the man that he is, then obviously we're moving towards some kind of Cold War. Or some kind of idiocy of some kind.
Barbara Wilkinson, let's just have your question. I just want to put it to the two politicians here. Barbara Wilkinson.
Would the security of the UK be safe in Jeremy Corbyn's hands if he became Prime Minister?
And just to put it to you too. Chris Grayling first and then Keir.
Well, my view is I'd be deeply uncomfortable about the security of the UK if Jeremy Corbyn became Prime Minister. And I have to say what's different now about the Labour Party. You know, we've been through swings of the political pendulum over the years. I didn't go to bed at night with past Labour governments worried about the security of the United Kingdom. There's many people in the Labour Party today who, if they were in power, I might not want them in power, but I wouldn't be worried about the security party of the United Kingdom. In the case of the current leadership, Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell, who haven't condemned the Russian state, who I'm afraid are unsupportive of institutions like NATO, I would be profoundly concerned about the security of the United Kingdom.
And Keir Starmer?
Chris is obviously worried about an early election coming back out with those old demons. Of course it would. Jeremy Corbyn has shown through the election campaign that he ran last year precisely the leadership that's needed on these issues. He's got a broad team, with myself included, got very serious attitudes to these questions. Of course it would be safe under Labour. Don't just listen to this rubbish that is put out because people don't want... Because what Chris doesn't want you to hear and to think about is the transformation in our society that needs to happen. We've been yearning for change for a very long time. There is huge inequality in our country, across our country, on almost every level. It needs to change. And in order to stop that change, this thing is peddled that somehow Jeremy Corbyn can't be trusted. It's not right, it's not true. Look at the people that he's got in his shadow cabinet who've got huge experience in this area. Look at what the voting record of the Labour shadow cabinet has been since the election. No, seriously, this is just an attempt to undermine the real change that needs to go on in our country.
I'll take a couple more points. The man in the red shirt there. On this point about Labour and Corbyn.
Corbyn has a long record of blaming NATO and the Western world for any problems with the Soviet Union. He's always been a useful idiot, one of Stalin's useful idiots.
All right, and the person over there on the outside.
I don't think there's anything wrong with being cautious when it comes to the security of our nation. So I have every confidence in Jeremy Corbyn's cautiousness.
Okay. Thank you. We'll go on. We're halfway through the programme. Let's go on to another question. But just before we do, we're going to be in Leeds next week. Our audience is all going to be under the age of 30. And after that programme in Leeds, we're taking a break for Easter. We're in Liverpool on April the 12th. So next week, Leeds, Liverpool, April 12th, and there on the screen is how to apply. So if you want to do that, I'll give the details at the end. That's the way to get to us. Ben Nurden, can we have your question?
Jean-Claude Juncker again said this week that Britain is going to regret leaving the EU. With his continuing bullish and threatening rhetoric, how does Britain hope to strike any positive deal in the EU if they're not prepared to cooperate and compromise?
Threatening rhetoric. Mairead McGuinness, threatening rhetoric from Jean-Claude Juncker.
I mean, did you actually listen to the voice he used? I mean, it wasn't threatening, but it was interesting that the leader of UKIP immediately jumped up and talked about being bullied. You are a big and great nation. I mean, it's not as if you're not strong in your own... Can I just finish the point, and then I will listen in response. And at this... let me just finish that. You are able to fight your corner. What we're trying to do... my colleague Elmar Brok said it this week in the Parliament, is he believes this is bad for everybody, for the United Kingdom and the European Union. I share that view. We're trying to limit the damage that it might have on our people, both the UK and the European Union. And to some extent, I think the emotion has gone out of the Brexit debate because we accept it's happening. I regret that, but I accept it's happening. What we're trying to do is find a way to keep us close, and around security we need to be close, but on other issues as well. But how we square that with the red lines that the Prime Minister has put forward way back just after the referendum happened around leaving the customs union and the single market. Now, we are going to have to find a solution. So, to some extent, I would have hoped that the idea that you're being bullied by Europe has dissipated. I mean,
and why would he say you'll regret your decision? What business is of his to say we'll regret our decision when people like Chris Grayling have argued for it and won a referendum on it?
Can I just say to you, off camera, we were having a big discussion about freedom of speech. If the head of the Commission cannot say that he thinks you'll regret your decision, it's his view. It's not a bullying view. He actually genuinely believes that. And he believes it not for the leaders, but for the people.
Do you believe it too? Are you with him on this? Are you? No, you.
Oh, I was looking at the gentleman.
No, I'm asking you. No, we know his view.
Well, I think so, yeah. Look, I represent, for example, the border constituency with Northern Ireland. All of the counties border with Northern Ireland. We have very good relationships. We didn't have in the past. Terrible things happened on the island of Ireland, in Northern Ireland, and you were impacted here in this country as well. 20 years ago, we had the Good Friday Agreement, and life is so much better. And the people I represent are really concerned about what might happen if there's no deal, if there's a bad deal. So when you talk about what Jean-Claude Juncker said, I would really be surprised that anyone thought he was bullying, because I was in the chamber. I chaired a lot of the debate as well, so I had a sense of it. And to some extent, when I listen to those, and there are many people who are pro-Brexit, probably in this audience as well, and I respect your point of view. But in the Parliament now, to some extent, the hiss is there, but the steam is gone. Because actually, we accept your decision, but we're trying to find a way that we don't damage each other in the process. And we're in this port, and we'll probably talk about what might happen here if things go wrong. For my country, look how peripheral we are. We use the land bridge to get our goods to the continent. Right. So, I think we should stop talking about he said, she said, I feel bullied, they're getting at me. You know, I think you're bigger than that.
Chris Grayling.
And I think you have to remember there's going to be some strong emotions in this. And for people in Brussels who believe passionately in further European integration in the European Union, our decision is a setback, and they're unhappy about it, they don't agree with it. I happen to take a different view. I'm very confident in the future of this country. I'm absolutely committed that we should remain good friends and neighbours. We as a government are absolutely committed to getting a sensible deal. That means we carry on working together in the areas where we need to. We carry on cooperating. but we have simply taken a decision to follow a different political path. So it's absolutely essential. And my experience in talking to my counterparts in other EU countries is that they want that. They want good relations. And I think we have to get over the kind of noise that you hear in a complex negotiation where strong things are said from time to time and simply work towards the outcome we all want, which is a sensible partnership, a sensible trading arrangement, a smooth Brexit, and something that works for everyone on both sides of the debate.
So you don't hang on, Mary. You don't buy the argument that the EU wants to be particularly tough in order to prevent other members of the EU taking the same route as Britain has taken.
I've no doubt there are those who have that view. We have to be robust in our negotiations. This process is going to be one where there's toing and froing. I think what the Prime Minister did in a speech 10 days ago is set out what I think is a very sensible approach, recognising the issues on the other side of the debate, setting out the need for that continuing partnership. We just have to reach a sensible resolution, and I think on that we would agree.
Keir Starmer, and I'll come to you.
I don't think anybody can quarrel with the fact that negotiations are going slowly and badly. And the tone was bad. The tone was bad from the start. And I'm afraid that started
whose tone?
On our side. We were very belligerent. We were very strong red lines that were put out. Boris Johnson didn't help the UK cause. Instead of saying constructively, how do we get through this, the government went down on a chaotic, ill-thought-through route with all sorts of blocked endings before they actually could get to the place they wanted to get to. Now, I accept that the tone has changed from the government on this, but they got off to a very bad start. I think everybody needs to dial this down, and we need to remember what we're talking about here. Europe is our history. We've shared values with Europe. We will trade with Europe in the future, and we need to collaborate and cooperate. And what we were talking about before, the terrible attacks that we're talking about before, that's just an example of why the UK will always need to be working with its EU partners. We need to be constructive about this to get the right decisions to a set of very complicated challenges that have been set up for us.
The man in the front row here. Let's hear from you.
Yeah, the situation is, if I may say, we had a referendum. The majority of the people voted to come out of it. As a government and as a shadow government, you weren't expecting that result. You were so confident you weren't going to get the result, you don't actually know what you're going to do. We need to get on with it. I think the events in Salisbury are a smokescreen, possibly, and an excuse for us to try and hop on the bandwagon and say we should remain in Europe as part of an international security.
All right. And the man in the check shirt, hold on, come to the man there. You, sir. Yes.
Can it not be said that the EU only agreed to continue negotiations once we agreed to pay them a sum of money? So really, is the EU only worried about the fact that we're actually going to prop up their economy as we're the second largest economy in the EU?
And good for you being the second largest economy, but I don't accept the premise of your question at all. We struggled before the end of the year to get over the first phase. We have to have a withdrawal agreement. There's a legal way of doing this. You can't do it any other way, or else there's absolute chaos, global chaos. The UK signed up to commitments up to 2020, and while initially your government said no, we wouldn't pay or we'd pay very little, now understands that the commitments have to be met.
We're going to be paying until 2064, apparently. I'm going to stop you because I must bring in other members of the panel.
Apologies,
Lorraine,
but I have more to say on this.
Yes, I'm sure.
If I'm allowed. I hope I'm allowed. Thank you. Now.
Brian Cox. No, wow. 5's into 60. We have 60 minutes and 5 people.
Yes, but I'm the only woman on the panel.
Well,
you haven't noticed.
Brian Cox.
Sorry, Brian.
No, it's okay.
Doesn't sound
so
it.
Sweet, actually.
I think it's a disaster. I really do. I think it's an absolute disaster. I don't think... I mean, this is... If there ever was a time for a united Europe, it is now. Politically, we need to be united. We do not need to be separated. We really need... You know, because we are very vulnerable at the moment. We've just seen it, and it's not a smoke screen. It happened. It's not a smoke screen installed. It's absolutely not. I completely disagree with you then. You know, there are 2 people lying in a hospital, and they'll tell you it's not a smoke screen. It certainly isn't. That really angers me. Sorry, but it does anger me. But I do feel that I do think we've brought it upon ourselves. I think the Remain campaign was a disaster, a total disaster. I think we didn't, and actually Brexit is a much sexier word than Remain. And I think people actually go more for the word than anything else. But that got you going, didn't it? Anyway, I just feel that at this time, we need strength. When you've got what you have in Russia and when you have what's going on in the country I live in, this country, this Europe, this continent needs to be strong. And it needs to really be strong, and it's not being strong. And all this kind of argy-bargy that's going on about this and that and the next thing, it's just weakening who we are. And they're laughing at us. The Russians are absolutely laughing at us.
Right, you're up there, the man in the blue shirt, yes.
If unity is so important, why are you so for a Scottish referendum, a Scottish independence?
It's not because... I'll answer that. I will answer that. We wanted to stay in Europe. We didn't want to leave Europe. Leaving England is a different thing. I will answer the question. What is the question? Give me the question again.
No, you said it. Afshin.
Okay, Europe doesn't allow countries to leave the European Union even after referendums. That's obvious. And the scare stories, now we're talking about, the European Union so quick to come to our support over Salisbury. Interesting that, because, we were really looking for NATO support first. Why EU so quickly? Mareed, my editor at RT is going underground. Colette Valentine is from Monaghan, on the border there. Knows the atrocities committed by both sides, by the British Army, may I say. Is there some threat via Brussels for violence in Ireland? What is going to continue happening to stop, depending on what you believe, whether you believe like Brian, whether you believe like Chris Grayling. In fairness, Chris Grayling and Jeremy Corbyn have always been on that side to a certain extent, arguably.
This is really not
There was a vote, and there should be no threats against the British people to stop what the British people want.
Of course there was a vote, but people... the peace in Ireland was hard won. And for 20 years, we've had...
Yes.
Thank you.
The Brexit won't ruin that.
It's not about the technical question of whether you can get goods and people over a border, although, of course, it is about that. It is about two communities that came together, put aside their differences, and the fact there's no border, that is a manifestation that is in the hearts of everybody that lives in and cares about.
So why is Europe threatening Britain?
It's about who we are and what we believe in.
Mairead, because you were talking about this the other day.
Sometimes on a panel, somebody says something just to be provocative. But Europe
Brussels is threatening a hard border.
Europe is not threatening. Do you understand anything about the customs union and the single market? Do you know how it works?
According to Chris Grayling, we're leaving.
I'm sorry.
I'm not giving a view on either side.
Can I just say this?
Talking about the negotiations.
I was hesitant about coming on this programme because it's, in a way, this is your business. But it's actually my business too, because I represent, I'm first Vice President of the European Parliament. I came in hesitation. I thought I mightn't get much love, but it's warm, which is nice. But though...
And we don't want to turn this...
Well, that was rather more than I anticipated. But
Yes.
But
Hashtag me too, Brian.
There's political correctness. That's political. See what I mean? You're right.
Carry on.
Hashtag you too. But to go back to... I have to make a tough point here. My teenage years were littered with stories of horror. Every single day there was an atrocity, either a murder or children. It was just horrendous. I have 4 children, and thank God they don't have a clue about that, except I remind them. We should remind ourselves that this happened and that our relationships as people was not good.
But do you have a clue how there's going to be an open border between Northern Ireland and the rest of Ireland after Brexit?
I don't think the United Kingdom has a clue.
But do you have a clue?
I have a political conviction that a hard border on the island of Ireland will not happen. And where there's a political will, there's a way. And in addition, the British Prime Minister, Theresa May, has said the same. I accept what she's saying. And the European Union supports the Irish position. It cannot happen.
But Chris
On the
Grayling,
other hand,
yes,
it's hard to square the circle if you're going to leave the customs union and single market. But we have an agreement from December. 3 options are on the table. One is that we do this with a very good trade agreement where this problem doesn't arise. The second is through some special mechanisms that we haven't heard of yet. And the third is regulatory alignment between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, which caused the Democratic Unionist Party to suggest that that meant a border in the Irish Sea. I make the point that I want no borders in Europe. I want Europeans to be united, but I'm Irish, you're British. We have our own identity, and I support Brian's very passionate plea for European unity. It is in our best interest. I cannot understand why this idea that somebody would say, well, you're being bullied by Europe. It's not in our interest to bully anybody, and it doesn't work, frankly.
I don't want to
People will
bully you,
not
but
be
I want to bring in Chris Grayling. Chris Grayling.
2 points. The first is we're absolutely clear there will not, there should be, there should not be, there must not be any kind of hard border in the island of Ireland. We don't think there's any need to. We put forward ideas about how to achieve that. But actually, number one in your list is what we're really working towards, which is a sensible trading partnership for the future. But the other point is I absolutely refuse to accept that Britain's choice to leave the European Union needs to lead to a return to the troubles in Northern Ireland. Nobody wants that. Exactly. Nobody wants to do anything that will make that happen. And both we in the United Kingdom and our friends in Ireland will do everything we can to make sure that never happens again.
And I support that, and that is, I think nobody wants that, nobody believes that will happen. But remember, since the referendum, the relationships between the two communities, which had become closer, is now more divided. There is no assembly in Northern Ireland, people have no political representation, and there is concern amongst ordinary people who don't get involved in politics about what their future will be. Many of my constituents live where they vote, but work in Northern Ireland. So it's a very common place.
Chris is quite right that we don't want a hard border in Northern Ireland. But, Chris, is there any credible voice out there, anybody in Ireland, in Northern Ireland, in any part of the UK, is saying that you can achieve what we all want to achieve in Northern Ireland without being in a customs union with the EU? Because there is no credible voice. That is not there. That's why the Labour Party position of saying negotiating a comprehensive EU customs union is so important, because it's the only... It doesn't solve completely the problem of the border, but without it, you can't...
If you have tariffs, you've got to have a border, is what you're saying, in effect. Chris Grayling. He's saying if you have tariffs, you have to have a border.
It's a
What's the answer?
commitment.
How do you have...
Well, we've set out in detail how you can make that work. But the point is the Labour Party position appears to be not to be in the current customs union, but to have a new one in which they seem to suggest the European Union will allow us to be equal partners in agreeing trade deals around the world. The European Union is not suggesting that's going to happen. Well, so I'm afraid, Keir, your position simply doesn't add up.
Our proposals have been seen... Let's just come back to it.
Be quick, we've got another question to get in.
What was incredible about the position that Jeremy Corbyn set out in Coventry the other week was that not only did the trade union and labour movement think it was a good idea, but the business community thought it was a good idea, and across Europe people said this could work. People said, here's a credible, serious proposition that has been put on the table, much more credible and serious than the government's.
All right, the woman bang in the middle there, please. Yes, and then I want to take one more question.
So we should remember why the European community came into existence after the Second World War. You know, with one aim is to keep peace and unite the people of Europe.
And you, over there. You over there, the man with the glasses on, yes. Yes, you. No, down in the blue with the spectacles on.
Yeah, isn't that why we have NATO? Isn't that why... Just because we don't have to be in the European Union to be united as Europe. We can all be friends with each other and trade with each other.
We're talking... Okay, fine.
I mean, you're leaving.
We've got to...
Yeah, no,
that's fine. I regret that, but...
We're in Dover. We have had more questions on this one Dover topic. When we were in Blackpool, everybody wanted to talk about fracking. We're in Dover. You'll guess what the question is. We have 6 or 7 minutes left. It's back to the EU and Brexit. Trevor Ottaway, let's have your question, please.
Will the Garden of England become the lorry park of England after Brexit?
And of course, Kent, where Dover is the Garden of England, and a lorry park, because it's estimated that queues 20 miles long, 29 miles long, would be the result of a 2-minute check on lorries going through Dover. Chris Grayling, you're the Transport Minister, the Transport Secretary. What are you going to do to prevent it?
So the answer to that is absolutely not, for 2 reasons. The first is that we will maintain a free-flowing border at Dover. We will not impose checks in the port. It was utterly unrealistic to do so. We don't check lorries now. We're not going to be checking lorries in Dover in the future. Absolutely clear, it cannot happen. The second point, well, it can't, and it won't.
The customs union.
I mean, because you're in Europe now, so there are no checks. When you leave Europe, there may be.
That's an announcement.
Let me be clear. We will not, in any circumstances, create a hard border in Dover that requires to stop every lorry in the port of Dover. It's not possible to do it.
What will you do then when you have tariffs between Europe and us?
So we will not stop lorries in the port of Dover. Goods flow through borders almost seamlessly around the world anyway. Go to some of our ports on the East Coast that take goods from outside the European Union, where the goods flow through smoothly and depart pretty much as soon as they arrive.
Let's hear from the people of Dover.
That's what's going to happen.
That's the assurance from the Secretary of State for Transport. Let's hear from some of the people here in the audience. You with your hand up there in the middle, yes.
Yes, there's a recent survey by the Royal College of London, which has been endorsed by the Port of Dover and by the local MP, Charlie Elphick, which exactly states that it will lead to a 29-mile tailback on the M20.
Well, I'll come to you, Maria. Afshan.
Well, I think you've got an exclusive there, David. Clearly, Chris Grayling has announced Tory policy is the same as Jeremy Corbyn's. There's going to be a customs union. And so you don't have anything to worry about in Dover at all.
No,
I presume that's what he said.
OK, but the person up there, yes, you.
I'd like to point out that we already have a lorry park in Dover. It's called the A20. Every 2 or 3 2 nights a week, we get it up in Aycliffe, just up the road there.
All right, and you, sir, over here?
Basically, it ties in with the previous question as well. You're saying about the hard border between Northern Ireland and the Republic. There's no need for a hard border. If you want to move livestock in this country, you have to create a movement licence. It takes a moment to create and send. Everyone knows who needs to know, and it goes out to everyone, and you move. There's no reason why you can't have goods.
That's the whole point. We'll manage trade electronically. The trucks will move through the border without stopping.
Precisely.
We'll manage them electronically. In the way it happens between Canada and the United States.
I'm sorry, I really cannot believe that you have said that, because to leave the customs union and single market means something. I would rather you stayed, and maybe I'm hoping that you'll change your mind. It has consequences. What we're trying to do is limit the damage of what might happen. And remember, for the Irish Road Haulage Association, this is a nightmare. It's a nightmare for a lot of our industry, for our agriculture, for food production. So I think what you're saying has got to be, if you like, matched by a paper that tells me how, because you haven't said how it will happen. We are trying to have a good relationship around trade, but it will be different than we have now. And to quote your Prime Minister in her speech last week, she said, we will be doing less together on trade. So how can you say that there won't be queues at the border when you are leaving the very gathering that allows us to have freedom of trade?
Because the only reason we would have to have we would have queues at the border is if we put in place restrictions that created those queues. We are not going to do that.
Keir Starmer,
country, you have to have borders.
OK, you two. Keir Starmer, come on. Come on, fair.
I came down here about 2 or 3 months ago to spend the day looking at the port for myself and talking through the problems with the Port Authority, with the staff, who are doing an incredible job getting 10,000 freight lorries through in a day. And they do it with a 2-minute gap or stop and check for each one. And that is really incredible because of our position in the EU. There are other lorries, as you will know better than I do, that are not going to the EU. I think it's 2 or 3% of those coming through Dover, and they take a lot longer.
45
and that
minutes.
is the reality. If you don't have a customs union, there will be queues. And Chris, you've changed your tone, because in October last year, when you were asked what's the solution, you said the solution is Operation Stack. Well,
no, I didn't.
Try that in the bars around Dover later on tonight.
That is not the case. I did not say that.
All right, up there at the back, very back. You. the man at the back there. What are you going to do? Read out what he
I was
said?
going to read out. It's to Chris Grayling. We've already had provision in place for Operation Stack around the border at the moment. We have a whole Munston airfield available to use if Operation Stack is...
Completely out of context, Keir. Completely out of context.
Right. We have so many statements out of context, don't we?
Should we not...
Yes,
well, I was talking about something completely different, so...
OK, man at the back there.
Should we not all just also acknowledge that it's the EU obliges member states to ensure their borders, their external borders, are fully controlled, watching people coming in and out and checked?
So what do you think would happen here in Dover?
Well, if we want an open border, as we do want in Ireland, as we do want in Dover, it's still the EU obliges their states to control their borders. Are they going to close that off for the UK and for Ireland and the South?
OK, Brian Cox.
Sorry, I couldn't hear what you're saying.
No, well, you got to take you back to the original question. Is this place going to become a lorry park?
Could be. I don't think we can... I think the customs union is the best idea. And I don't think that seems to me... It's so logical, it's so simple, and it seems to serve everybody. And why don't we do it? I don't understand why there's a resistance to it.
Sorry, who's saying that? Let's just get a microphone to you.
Gentleman saying...
Yeah, go on.
For me?
Yeah.
The reason why we don't want to be in a customs union and the reason why we want out the single market, because we then have to comply with the EU regulations. And what we do is by being out of it, we don't have freedom of movement, we can control our own destiny, our democracy, and, you know, where we want to go in the future.
OK, and you in the front, say here. Yeah.
Those of us who live in East Kent will tell you that, and you'll see the evidence as you drive home tonight, that East Kent already is a lorry park.
Anybody else want to come in on this? Where? Go on, far away. We've got a minute left.
Are we allowed now?
Yes. Who? Yes, go on, far away.
The geniuses at the DFT have actually decided that the Manston Airfield will be where Operation Stack is. Has anybody ever tried to get a truck up and around the Manston Airfield?
OK.
Just to make sure... The transport... I know, yeah, I know,
solution
Chris,
to the
but the
problem is
transport...
not Manston
No,
Airfield.
hang on, Chris. You've had a good say. Please, let me have a go. Right? The transport system in Thanet is already in congestion. And to add to it, a further load of vehicles is just unbelievable. What they do is they put out a load of porta toilets along there, and they're just going to try and run them through the villages from the A229 in there, and then by some genius means it's got to go then filter back all the way back into Dover.
All right, well, I think you may
so it means
lose...
they've got to go back through Canterbury and back down the other way.
Well, all right. A very brief last word, Mary. Brief,
Hard
though,
to be
really
brief.
brief.
But to the gentleman's point, because regulation was obviously an irritant and people voted against Europe for regulation, 2 points. The Prime Minister has actually wrote back on that because she wants to stay with the European Medicines Agency. It's good regulation. The Chemicals Agency is good regulation. I hope the Food Safety Agency you'll stay with, because that arose out of a BSE crisis that was from the United Kingdom, and it's done great work. The second point is, if you do move away, and I think it's called managed divergence, you have then got to check more at the borders because you have different rules and regulations and different standards. So I would like us to stay close on regulation.
OK, point made. Thank you very much. Our time's up. In fact, I think we've probably gone on a bit too long. Next Thursday, we're going to be in Leeds, and we have the transgender rights activist Paris Lees on the panel. I don't know yet who the other four are going to be. And then after Easter, on the 12th of April, we're going to be in Liverpool. Now, if you ring 0330 123 9988, you can apply to join. You can equally go to the address on the screen, our website, and apply there. Question Time Extra Time with Adrian Chiles starts now on BBC 5 Live, and you can watch it as well pressing the red button or going to the BBC iPlayer. But here in Dover, in the ferry terminal, in this wonderful setting, my thanks to our panel, to all of you who came here. And until next week's Question Time, good night.